much about your story. You haven't told me much about it, but I know you've served. I know you're in the Marine Corps, and I'm grateful to you and those who enable me to do what I do and enable us to be the country that we are with all of our imperfections and our shortcomings, because we're made of imperfect people.
So to be clear, you're saying don't storm the Capitol. I would always hear, if you have a problem, you need to write your congressman. Is that how it goes? Is that what I'm supposed to do?
Well, that's what everybody thinks, anyway.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, so I wrote a letter. I was listening to Oliver Anthony. I don't know if you know who that is.
That's the singer from Farmville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was getting a little amped up, and I wrote this. And before I read it, I'll let you know, I sent it to a bunch of my veteran friends to see how they felt about it.
Yeah. And this was when? Just happened, or?
That I wrote this?
Yeah.
A couple days ago. Okay. When I found out that I would be sitting down with you, I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to talk about. I mean, my focus is typically health and wellness and how that relates to veterans and like mental clarity and how to get back into the community and find your purpose. I've had positions of power in the past, and when I was of sound mind, I felt like I made better decisions. Empathy, things where you can dissolve your ego to put yourself in a better position to make some of these choices and these decisions. It works out for everyone. So over the last 12 years, since I've gotten out of the Marine Corps, I've done a lot to figure out how to get mental clarity, how to achieve that. And that's kind of what my channel is about, for the most part. So after I read this and you respond to it, I would love to hear, first of all, what you think about what I wrote and what other veterans have signed off on. And then what you do to find mental clarity as you find yourself in this position of power and influence and decision making. All right? Dear Congressman Good, titled A Veteran's Cry for Hope. America used to be a place of the people, for the people, and by the people. Lately, it seems like a playground for mentally ill politicians misappropriating our tax dollars. What was once a beautiful landscape has turned into a wasteland of corporate exploitation. All the while, our southern border seems to be wide open for the taking. Cheap, affordable, everyday products are riddled with just enough poison to keep us sick, enabling Big Pharma to collect trillions. Our trusted doctors have become crooked pill pushers in a healthcare system that's overprescribing and undermanaging our wellness. Gain of function is a nightmare we once thought only existed in horror movies. But after 2020's unprecedented earnings, pandemics will inevitably become the new business model. Meanwhile, big media is desperately trying to silence free speech and keep us at each other's throats, arguing about trigger words like gender and misinformation. What can you say to those of us who question the federal government's ability to fix our nation's skewed core values? What hope would you give those of us who feel like our biggest enemies are sitting in D.C., praying that the spirit of 1775 is long forgotten? What can you say to prevent us from assembling and inspiring the masses to join in a much-needed revolution? Texas is the latest example of like-minded people taking things into their own hands, and the rest of us veterans are taking notes. We, the people, are desperately ready for a change. We need real guidance, not political gibberish, or we, the people, will be forced to take action. Sincerely and with love, every able body.
Wow. I think that sums up how a lot of Americans are feeling more broadly. You can speak to, more specifically from veterans, but our country is so far from the vision of our founders. Our federal government is so far from the limits of the Constitution intended. You said, we were founded as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Probably most famously said by Abraham Lincoln, who said that, if we fail, then government of the people, by the people, for the people will perish from the earth. This experiment in democracy, this longest existing nearly 250-year experiment in democracy. But as you know, the founders intended that power would be retained at the local level, closest to the people. Our Constitution, as I'm sure you know, was intended to limit government, not to limit the people. And most founding documents or constitution-like documents for other countries, it's limiting what the people can do and restraining the people. In our case, the founders who sought divine wisdom, divine intervention, believed it was a miracle that they founded this country. Most of them Christians, virtually all of them, if not all of them, at least deists believing in a higher power, but sought. They prayed, and it's incredible that we say, "Oh, there's separation church and state." Well, the founders didn't have that, didn't intend that. It's the same founders who wrote the Constitution and wrote the First Amendment with the Establishment Clause on religion that established a practice of Congress opening a prayer, a national day of prayer, and specifically themselves sought divine intervention in what they did. But we have very limited powers in the Constitution for the federal government. And I think perhaps the 9th and 10th Amendments are the most underappreciated amendments to the Constitution, where those amendments together say that the powers not given specifically to the federal government in the Constitution are left to the people in the states. And then it also says that the enumeration of certain rights in the Constitution should not be construed to mean that we don't retain every other right that's not prohibited to us in the Constitution. Basically, in other words, if the Constitution doesn't say we can't do something, we can do whatever we want as long as it's not prohibited to us in the Constitution. And again, if the Constitution doesn't give the power specifically to the federal government, it's to the people in the states, because we have more influence over our local and our state government than we do our federal government. And you're talking about the frustration with Washington and the federal government in D.C., and I'm new to politics. I didn't run for office till I was 50 years old. And we're sitting right now in Campbell County, just a few miles from where I lived at the time, lived for 18 years, right a few miles from this office. And my friends and neighbors came to me and asked me to run for county supervisor when I was 50 years old, had never intended to run for office, had never tried to run for office. Served one term. My wife and I resisted it and prayed about it and tried to find somebody else to do it. Couldn't find somebody, so we agreed to do it. After 4 years, said I wasn't going to run again. And I had a friend and neighbor who wanted to run in my place, who I thought would do a good job. And so I just didn't have peace because when you're county supervisor, you add that onto your job. And you're a citizen doing your other thing. It's part-time. It's pay $7,000 a year. And a few months later, I had friends and neighbors come again and ask me to run for Congress. And again, my wife and I resisted while praying about it, because we knew it would turn life upside down. How do you run for Congress if you're not independently wealthy or self-employed even, or retired? And I was none of those things. Turns out you quit your job and take a big risk. And I've worked at Liberty University. I wasn't a wealthy guy. I was blessed, but I wasn't wealthy. But you get to Washington, I will say, you get told you can't trust anybody. They're all bad. They're all corrupt. They're all compromised. And sadly, that's largely true, but out of 435 House members, and 220 of them being today my party, Republican Party, I will say that there's 25 that I really respect and admire, and I think are there for the right reasons, for love of country, for principle, following the Constitution, risking everything politically for themselves to do what they believe is right, meaning their primary motivation is not to be reelected, it's to do what's right. There are some other good ones beyond that, but I would say hardcore that I really respect. There's kind of an iron sharpens iron principle. They had to be members of the Freedom Caucus primarily, which is the caucus that I'm part of. But Washington's designed to try to prevent you from making change. The deck is stacked against you. The system is stacked against you, where you don't ascend into higher levels of leadership or influence unless you play the game and you do what you're told. And you put party ahead of principle, and you're compromise. The mantra is, we'll always start fighting next year. Next time we'll do it. We can't do it this time, but next time we'll do that. And so if you stand up and you fight and you fight for what you believe in, and do what you said you would do, and you believe that you work for the people instead of the people in Washington, you're not very popular up there. I'm personally being retaliated against for that with a primary challenger. Funded by millions of dollars from the swamp to try to make an example of me for fighting the status quo and trying to bring change. I'm not the only one. There's some other ones. So our frustration is warranted. But I will say this. our government does reflect the people to some extent, meaning whether it's apathy, people who don't participate, whether it's people who don't do their homework and they just go and they vote without knowing what they're voting for or knowing who they're voting for or what those people stand for or what they've done since they've been in office, or people who just, they don't hold their representatives accountable for what they do when they're there and they're not hearing from them. And so to some extent, our government does reflect the people. I won't say perfectly by any sense, because you've got this entrenched class now that's there, that's not responsive to people, and I would say some who hold contempt for the people, honestly. The people, that they don't know any better. We know better. They don't really know. Because I'll tell you, there's conflict up there with the handful of, I would say, courageous conservative warriors, my colleagues and I. The members of Congress, the larger group that doesn't like what we're doing, they know the people believe in and listen to us. And they hate that we tell the people who they are and what they're doing. And they're always ranting and raving and complaining at us that we tell the people what's wrong with our own party. And, you know, for example, the spending bill we just passed, and I voted against it, of course, but half of our party voted for it. And it kept in place the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer policies and spending levels from when they had power. Here we're a year in and we have power, and we're keeping in place their priorities, their spending levels, what they want. They would never do that if they had power. And the Democrats voted for it 207 to 2. Republicans voted for it 107 to 106. It was right down the middle. But they don't like that we then go blast it and tell people what they voted for. I tried to add a border security provision to it, that if you're going to fund this government, why would you fund a government that's facilitating a border invasion? Why would we give Mayorkas and Biden billions of dollars more for this border invasion? And then when Texas, to your point, is trying to stand in the gap and secure their own border, the federal government suing them and trying to prohibit them from doing it while saying, oh, we don't have the resources to do it, we don't have the manpower to do it, but Texas is trying. And the federal government is trying to stop Texas from securing their own border. I know that's a lot, particularly on one aspect of many things that you touched on there. But I guess I can pause and let you ask a follow-up, since I've kind of rambled on.
Well, you know, from what you just said, it sounds like, from your perspective, that you're against, the odds are against even you and your colleagues. So
it is.
Where's the hope? If I'm asking you to give me hope, where's your hope? What keeps you in the fight? Are you up for re-election anytime soon? And if so, why?
You know, and it's funny. I like what one famous radio commentator often says, and I have to be somewhat political here. What I mean, partisan, I guess I should say it that way. He often will say, Republicans don't have the answers to all your problems by any means. He said, but it's true that the Democrats are the source of almost all of our problems in the country. I would also submit that almost everything that plagues our culture and our society is a failure to follow God's principles for morality, marriage, and the family, by the way. You touched on that a little bit on, I forget exactly how you said it with your letter, but you talked about, I believe you talked about gender identity and things like that. You know, we're debating and fighting about what sex is or what gender is, not following the science of that. You know, I don't believe God makes any mistakes, and I certainly believe in creation. But it certainly would be easier for me to just walk away. And it would be, you know, that's one of the reasons I was reluctant to do it. I had a desire to do it because I cared about the issues and I cared about our country when I got asked to run in 2019 for the 2020 election. But I knew, to the extent you can know something before you do it, I knew it would cost almost everything, and it would be all consuming, and you have to be all in, and it would turn life upside down. And if you try to do it right, it's really hard, and it's really demanding, and it's grueling. I often wonder why, to your question, if you're up there and you know you're compromised, and you know you're not doing right, and you know you're surrendering and giving in on your principles, your convictions, your values, or whatever, how do you put your head on the pillow at night and sleep with that? How do you go home and look at your wife and your kids, or your family, your friends who know what you said you were and what you are? And why would you do it? Because apart from a purpose and a mission and feeling like you're there for the right reasons, trying to do the right things, it's a miserable life. To spend 3 weeks of the month up in D.C., I live in my office, I sleep in my office. Again, I'm not a wealthy guy. I don't have a place up there and a place back here. I'm in the district as much as I can. I don't do anything socially in D.C. I don't stay in D.C. one moment longer than I have to do the job that I'm sent there to do when we're in session, to vote. That's ultimately what we do. We vote on your behalf. And I try to let you guys know what I'm voting on, why I'm voting that way, why I did what I said, because obviously it gets slanted and spun by your enemies. So if you're one of the compromised guys and you vote for something and I vote against it, you're trying to make the case on why it was good and attacking those of us who voted against it. And at the same time, I got to explain to my constituents why it was bad and why I had to vote against it. And so you're in that struggle and that battle with your own party even. But I do feel like, to the extent that one person can, that I'm making a difference, and I know I'm there for the right reasons. I know that I'm fighting for the right things. I know that I've done what I believe was right. Could I be more effective? Could I be better at it? Yes, but doing right is not complicated or confusing. It might be hard because it takes risks and it takes courage and there's opposition and not everybody likes it. But it's not confusing or complicated. We know what's right. It's a question. And one of the things I pray when I lead our caucus in prayer, I'll say, Lord, give us the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to do it. Because part of it's to know what to do, but then the other part of it is being willing to do what you know to do. So I am running again. This would be my third. I've been there 3 years, so I'm running for my third term. I have a nomination battle that'll be in June, and then if I were to prevail, then I'd be in the general election in November. I'd like to do it a little bit longer if the folks will have me. I'm not entitled to it. I have to earn that. And good news is when you tell everybody the same things and you do what you said you're going to do, and you're consistent and you have integrity, then I think people respect that, and everybody agrees with me on every issue, obviously. But there's peace in that. I'm a born-again Christian. My faith is the most important thing in my life. You asked about how do I find clarity. That's how I'm grounded. I spend time in God's Word in the Bible every morning. I get up at 4:30 in the morning, spend time in the Word every morning, spend time in prayer in the morning because I need it. That's what grounds me and focuses me. And I'm as a Christian, I'm trying to please Him. I'm trying to please the Lord in what I do, and I fall short of that, but that's my desire anyway. I try to have eternal perspective. I realize the Lord gives us 80 or so years here. If we live a long life by, typical standards, and then I believe we spend eternity in one of two places, and that's what motivates me is to try to live for eternity, try to influence others for eternity, try to be an example and a testimony and a witness in what I do. Again, I fall short of those things, but that's what is the most important driving thing in my life.
What do you think the opinion of you on the streets, what do you think it is? Because in lieu of this interview, I told quite a few people that I'd be talking to you. And it's a mixed bag. I've heard some interesting things. I'm obviously not going to name any names or real issues, but it was 50-50. Some people say that you are, I even heard the word or the term sheep or wolf in sheep's clothing, that you're not as for the veterans as it may seem. And then you've got other people who say you're what we need, and they hope you get reelected. Yeah. So, as somebody who has given themselves to this, and you put yourself on the line, your life and everything, how does that make you feel to know that? I guess no matter what you do, there's going to be a mixed emotion about who you are and what you represent. But just to know that I heard those things just by saying your name.
Well, and you're in greater Lynchburg here. And Lynchburg is a purple city. The counties tend to be a little red right around Lynchburg, but Lynchburg's a purple city. I grew up in Lynchburg and moved here when I was 9 years old. If you're a natural human emotion is you do want people to like you, to approve of you. There's something wrong with you if you don't. Now, if that's what you're pursuing as your priority, that's a problem, as you know. Because again, I believe you do what's right, and then be held accountable for what you do. Be able to. So it's funny because I've talked about some of the folks who get upset when we talk about how they vote. I tell them, if you don't want me to tell people how you vote, you probably should vote differently. because members will get mad, they'll vote wrong, and they get mad at us when we call them out. And I'm like, you can call me out on any vote I take. I will defend any vote that I take. I don't believe I've cast a wrong vote since I've been there. And I've cast thousands of votes. And most of them aren't very hard to know what's right. Sometimes there's some, you're trying to, what's most right, because there's something in legislation where there's some good things and some not so good things. You're trying to do what you think is most right. So that's some, but generally, and I'm not going to vote for stuff I think is bad to get some stuff that I think is good. And, kind of like, okay, if your drink here, if half of it's really good stuff and half of it's really bad, you're probably not going to drink it, right? But we want people to vote that way. Oh, well, take the good, but take the bad. So anyway, all of us would like people to like them and to approve of them. That's a natural human emotion. Certainly when you're running for office, an elected official, you're trying to win favor with people, but I'm trying to win favor by doing what I think is right and for standing on the things that I said that I would stand for. And honestly, when we're a divided country, and my district's competitive. I've got deep blue at parts of my district. I've got cities that are more blue. I've got an area of the district that's very deeply blue. And, I won with 52% the first time and 57% the second time. So there's division there, if you will. And our country's divided. But I tell folks who are in competitive districts like mine, focus on the people who supported you because you told them what you would do and they wanted you to do it. And do that, and you'll motivate them and validate the trust they placed in you. If you're so focused on the people who didn't vote for you, meaning you told them what you were going to do, you told them what you stood for, you told them what you would pursue if you would win the election, and they didn't want you to do that, and they voted against you. Well, now they're mad at you because you're doing what you said you were going to do. That's not who I'm trying to please, if you will, because they have a very different worldview, a very different view of our country, a very different view of government than I do. But as it applies to veterans, I have spent more time with veterans and veterans groups than anything else that I've done in Washington. And part of, I think, trying to do a good, and I didn't serve, and I have great admiration for people like you who did, and who do. And so part of trying to do a good job is to, because just because you get elected, you're not an expert on everything, right? Obviously, no one has life experiences that are all encompassing. And so part of trying to do a good job, part of trying to do a good job is to listen and to hear and to understand and to spend time with people. And we've done far and away over 50 veterans-related events since I've been there. That could be meeting with a veterans group roundtable. It could mean going to a VA facility. It could mean doing a Vietnam veterans pinning event. It could be going down to Monument Terrace. It could be meeting with veteran groups who come in D.C. and want to sit down with me, or here in this office, in our district office, or wherever we might be. Just trying to understand what's important to them, what they go through, what they've went through. But you talked about our government being so messed up, and one of the challenges we have is, you said it in different words in this, but we spend so much money on things, we borrow and spend so much money on things that are not an appropriate role of the federal government, that are not justified. Not only should we not do because we don't have the money, but in many cases they're just harmful things or bad things. Paying people not to work, for example, growing the dependent class, the welfare class. So many things that are not the appropriate role of federal government that it makes it difficult for us to do the things that we should do. And I would submit the primary role of the federal government is the safety and security of the country, national defense, national security. And part of that is taking care of our veterans, not only keeping our promises to them, but that's important to recruitment and retention. If the individual you're trying to recruit into the military and that you're trying to retain in the military, if they see that you're keeping your promises to your veterans and trying to take care of your veterans, that's an important component. Not only is it right by the families and the veterans themselves who are in need of care and attention, but it's also important for those who are serving now. And again, we're trying to recruit to serve, to see that we're doing that. But when you're voting on things, you'll have one part of it that's attached. That's, again, one of the many things wrong with the government. Will attach something good to some things that are not good, and they try to get you to vote for the good part, the bad stuff, by attaching the good stuff to it, and if you will. And so then if you vote for The stuff that's bad, you're attacked for it. If you don't vote for the stuff that's good, you're attacked for it. And so you're looking at the whole of the legislation. And so sometimes what happens is people who have an agenda or an axe to grind, or they just disagree with you philosophically generally, they'll take a vote and tell the partial story. And they'll say, oh, like, so I voted against the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. Why did I vote against it? Because it had all kind of climate extremism in it, policies, the Biden policies on that. It has all kinds of transgender LGBTQ stuff in it. It's got CRT and DEI in it. It's trying to force our military to go to electric vehicles. It's things that I think are terrible, bad policy that's weakening and diminishing our military. Now, as you might imagine, when you got an $800 billion defense bill, there's good stuff in there too. But it's not focused. This administration is not focused primarily on lethality and readiness and effectiveness. It's focused on the military as a social experiment. And Biden himself and Secretary Austin have said the greatest threat to the country, they told the military, is climate. And the other thing they've been focused on is we're going to root out racism and white supremacy and white nationalism, whatever those things are, out of the military. And what they really mean are conservatives or Trump supporters. They think that's the greatest threat to the country's climate and our own military themselves, the people who are in our military. And I submit, and you know this much better than I do, and I know we're short on time, but you get rid of all the patriots, you get rid of all the conservatives, who's going to fight for us? What are we going to be left with in our military? So I would just end with saying thank you for your service, your sacrifice. I don't know much about your story. You haven't told me much about it, but I know you've served. I know you're in the Marine Corps, and I'm grateful to you and those who enable me to do what I do and enable us to be the country that we are with all of our imperfections and our shortcomings, because we're made of imperfect people.
So to be clear, you're saying don't storm the Capitol. Do not assemble my veteran colleagues and take it over.
I think we've still got time for hope to take it back through the political process, but there must be an overwhelming uprise politically. We've got overwhelming at the polls. It can't be close. And often I'll say, have we suffered enough yet to connect it to politics, to connect it to policy, and to realize who's perpetrating that on us? I got to run.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Appreciate it. Thank you.